because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Laura's looking at me. She's like, yeah. I always go down first when we're going to watch a movie. I'm like, I'll calibrate the system to run some tests.
I thought like a calibration was like a one-time thing. I didn't realize we're calibrating literally every time we turn on the television.
No, I play with it. I even play with it during the movie sometimes.
I know, Justin. It's super annoying when we're...
It's like, well, one of us can calibrate the system while the other one does dishes. Like, why is Justin always calibrating the system?
Wait a second. Yeah.
I know, Laura. You should be like, I'll calibrate the system today, Justin. Why don't you hang back here? I'll get us dialed in.
By the way, are you recording?
I am recording.
All right. Welcome everyone to Cows in the Field. This is a movie podcast inspired by the jungle-crazed musings of one Werner Herzog. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we're talking about the 2007 Danny Boyle Reigniting the Sun movie, Sunshine. And we're happy to be joined for the third timer on the podcast, my good friend from college, Vishal Dave.
Hey, guys.
Welcome.
Welcome, man. So, Vishal, let's actually start with the pitch, because as with many movies we've covered recently, I suspect that there are going to be many people who have not seen this movie. And they might wonder, should I see this movie? Was this 2007 sci-fi movie directed by Danny Boyle? The guy who directed Slumdog Millionaire? He never directed any other sci-fi movies. Is this going to be any good? Let's give the pitch. Let's do a round robin on the pitch. Vishal, do you want to start us off? What would be your 10-second pitch for someone to watch this movie?
I mean, they're gonna drive a bomb to the sun. Feels like the pitch. I mean, like that's the Fast and Furious Fast 9 pitch on this thing, right? It's just sort of like, hey, they're gonna. This is a movie about a spaceship that's on the back of a bomb that they're gonna drop off in the sun because bad things are happening on Earth. sounds pretty good to me. I mean, it sounds. I mean, actually, it's so I get the Danny Boyle thing, but Alex Garland wrote the script to this, right?
Yes. Yeah, I didn't realize that until we watched it again.
Totally, and like Alex Garland, Ex Machina, right? Like, I think there's some stuff that like this like general crew of people have done more recently that people might be into. So I think if you said Danny Boyle, if you said Alex Garland, the guy who did Annihilation, who did Ex Machina, I think there's some people that would hop back to this.
Yep. I think that's totally right. Laura, what would be your pitch?
Okay, I'm going to take a totally different direction. Because yes, they are on a bomb that's driving to the sun, and that's cool. Also, though, has your mom ever told you not to look directly into the sun? Maybe you thought that was because it would hurt your vision. But what if it was because looking at the sun directly would like make you have an existential crisis or an epiphany or a dissociative event? Basically, it's going to forever change you. That's what this movie's about.
I like that. Yeah. I like that. Guys, I didn't come up with the pitch. I just realized.
You wrote the document.
Yeah, I didn't think of a pitch. I was sitting here like, shit, I got to come up with a pitch here for this movie. I mean, I think you guys said it all. I mean, I don't know.
That's what a cop-out.
I mean, here's what I'll say. It's kind of a genre bender, right? It starts out sci-fi. It's got elements of horror. It's an adventure movie. It's an ensemble movie. It's got a bit of everything. I think that alienated some fans early and could have potentially explained why it didn't do that well at the box office and hasn't had that much enduring success. But I really think it's part of the reason why it has a lot of charm and holds up. So the kind of genre bending element of it. So that would be maybe my pitch.
Our sun is dying. Mankind faces extinction. Earth frozen in a sullen winter. 16 months ago, our last best hope left Earth. Our purpose, to create a star within a star.
Vishal, now, we saw this together in Davis. This was the one we saw together in Davis. We did not see Children of Men together. I mean, we might have seen Children of Men together, on DVD or something. But we saw this one. I'm almost positive.
It was like a mandate. Right? Justin and I got like noodles. I think we watched a movie.
It was good.
We held hands.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, it was good. I think the theater might have been empty. I think besides us, I think we maybe even saw a matinee. I mean, it was cool, man.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember we came out of this movie, and I think we were both really into it. And so tell me a bit about like your initial reaction to the movie, and coming back to it, what has changed or what has stayed the same for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this movie's rad. I personally really think this movie's awesome. It hits a couple of things for me, right? Like I think I've said this before. I love person on a mission of no return movies, right? Like I love that stuff. Particularly space, like people going to space knowing that they're never going to come back. I probably read more than I should about like sort of generation shit fiction, right? All that stuff about like people like colonizing Mars or something, or just like, what it's like to like live on some ship for like a generation or something like that. It's got a little bit of 2001. It's got a little bit of Aliens, right? There's like homages to a bunch of movies I like. I like the like genre mashup that you're talking about. Like the third act is just basically a horror movie, right? Like I think that's kind of fun. Because you don't expect that, and so when I was watching this actually with my wife and my sister last night, they're like, "Whoa, where is this going?" And like like that part where they first enter Icarus 1 and they start doing those little like flash cuts, those little like cigarette burns of like the face, and people are just like, and I'm just like watching them talk about it, and they're like, "Wait, did you just see that? Is our TV busted?" Like they're trying to figure out if it's a glitch, or if like something's or like the signal's bad or something like that. Like it really like struck a note, and I just kind of like sat there on the couch just like in glee. I was like, it's happening, like the movie is turning. I don't know. I like all that. I'm a Danny Boyle fan generally, although I don't know. I think some of his latest stuff I've been a little bit bummed out by. I feel like Danny Boyle hasn't been as consistent lately, but it was cool. And then it's got like a great cast, right? Like all those people went on to do amazing stuff, but like they were cool. They were cool people back there, right? I mean, like a early Rose Byrne, Michelle Yeoh, like Chris Evans, like pre-Captain America Chris Evans.
Yeah.
Like, I think one of his better roles. Like I don't think I've seen a better Chris Evans movie, right? So
let's talk a little bit about Chris Evans. Actually, I think it's an interesting
I'm not
performance.
ready for that, but sure.
Well, it's an interesting performance by him because he plays, and he's kind of made his career. I guess it's been, post this and Scott Pilgrim. He's made
this is kind of Scott Pilgrim-y.
It is.
Yeah.
But post that, he kind of has made a bunch of like, I'm the like squeaky clean good guy sort of thing. I mean, that's been this Captain America thing, and which makes sense. That's kind of what he looks like. But in this, he plays a really abrasive utilitarian type guy.
Yeah, I think he's great in this movie.
Yeah.
I also just love all the masculine interaction moments in this. The apology scene. I love that.
Oh, that's a funny scene. Yeah, that's a good. That's a good.
Just like, is that an apology? Yes.
Like it's just his delivery. He's like, yeah, okay, yeah, that was the apology. Bye. It's just so perfect.
But and we also got to in the same breath we have to mention Cillian Murphy because is this? I mean, I think you're a Cillian fan, Vishal, right? I mean, I know Laura is.
Totally.
I mean, for you guys, I mean, how do you feel Cillian fits into the movie? Does this work for his energy, or because I kind of feel like Cillian is a little bit more mysterious to me. I don't totally feel like I know him the way I feel like with Chris Evans. I feel like I kind of have a sense of who he is as like a person after watching all the Captain America movies. But seeing all these Cillian Murphy movies, I'm like, is there something dangerous about him? Something kind of mysterious? I'm never quite sure, but I don't know. What do you guys think about Cillian?
I like Cillian Murphy. I think he's, he shows up in the Batman movies, right? As Scarecrow, which is like a pretty cool Scarecrow because he has a little bit of that, like, let's put it this way. I'm glad that he was the physicist because it gave him some balance. Because if I just look at Cillian Murphy and he was playing the Searle character, the psychologist character, I'd be like, oh my gosh, they just sent a psycho on this mission. Like he just has a little bit of like a oh my gosh, they just sent like an insane, like they sent the Scarecrow to be the psychologist on this mission. So like I think it was a good turn to have him be the physicist.
He had at this point already been Scarecrow because he was Scarecrow in that would have been 2005, Batman Begins. So
right.
He had been Scarecrow, and he had done 28 Days Later. And so, probably to audiences, Cillian Murphy is the actor who you're he's like the obvious one who's going to be the lead. Because he's just of this crew, he's got to be the most famous one at this point.
Or Michelle Yeoh.
Well, Michelle Yeoh, but
like,
yes.
yeah.
Michelle Yeoh obviously has
had
the like biggest career.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know if she'd be as well known.
His star is going up at this point. Yeah. When did he do Red Eye? Do you have IMDb on for that one?
I can look it up, but yeah.
But it's around then. It's
around the same
when
time,
he plays like a villain. He's just he's so unnervingly beautiful. Is the thing about Cillian Murphy. And so he can play evil and off-kilter and deranged quite well, just because those eyes are just so big and so blue. They're like Zooey Deschanel's eyes, like put into a man's face. But so I agree with you. If he was the psychologist, you would have a feeling like right away that he was gonna go off the deep end.
Because you don't a lot of the other characters, I feel like you see where they are, like mission versus humanity, right? Like you kind of get like some lines are being drawn pretty early on. He feels the most like uncertain, and I think that's why I would maybe think of him a little bit as the lead, because I kind of thought him as he was the person we were supposed to identify with.
Yeah.
He is, right? He gets the monologue, he gets to like lay out like why they're going on the mission. He gets like the big poetic scene, but he's also the one where sort of like he's like not really sure. Like you don't really know if he's like about the mission or about the humanity or both or whatever. And he's somewhere in between, whereas it feels like other characters are more clearly defined, like mission versus humanity, right?
I think that's exactly right. Yeah. But oh, go ahead, Vishal.
I was just gonna say humanity in this context being sort of the ethics of like what to do with your crewmates, not like saving humanity, right? Like obviously the mission is to save humanity, but it's like sort of dedication to the mission versus like sort of how far you're willing to go, right? To do it, right?
Well, I think that conflict, by the way, Red Eye is 2005 as well. So he had a good 2005. I think that conflict, which is the central theme of the movie, is I think I would describe it as between sort of a choosing the greater good versus choosing to sort of follow the obligations that you have to the personal obligations that you have to the people sort of around you, right? The people that you have some sort of immediate connection with. And one way to kind of get a feel for this is, I think many of us feel differently about, helping a family member in need than we do just about helping someone on the street, even if it would be the same amount of, effort or cost to us. We would think I have kind of a more of an obligation to my family members than I do to just some random person. And now there's presumably going to be a limit to that, right? So you might think like, well, what if it's 5 people versus one family member? What if it's 100 people? So there are limits, and it's complicated how that calculus gets balanced. But most intuitively, the way we would think about this is we would think that the personal or special obligation matters to some extent, but of course the numbers do matter as well, right? So that's why like we think there's something wrong about just people inheriting massive amounts of money being passed down to them and none of that being distributed out, right? Maybe there's some obligation to not just keep the money, give it to your kids, right? And have them be like lazy little slobs who are totally provided for, right? Because there's a limit, right? Like, and I think a lot of people feel motivated by that. So there's some balance, but of course it's a very tricky balance how we do it. And these characters are navigating that, right?
What are you asking? That we weigh the life of one against the future of mankind? Kill him.
Cassie.
No.
Cassie.
I know the argument. I know the logic. You're saying you need my vote. I'm saying you can't have it.
Yeah, I mean, I also wonder, and this will get to a little bit of behind the scenes, but, they are supposed to be on this mission for years. They've already been on the mission for years, and there's going to be years more to go, right? Like, they still got to drop the bomb and then get back. It's going to be years and years. So they've been together in this really enclosed space for a long time. And apparently Danny Boyle in pre-production made them all live together in like, I don't know, in a house or something in London. So they were all kind of together. And you can imagine that in that time, these sorts of conflicts will arise. And Kappa, for all his like, viewpoint character status, he's a bit aloof and like withdrawn, right? And you could see how that could be really irritating, especially if like, you're maybe a slightly more prone to just like, let's act now and get on with things. And then this guy's dragging his heels. He's in the corner sulking or whatever. You could see him getting a little bit irritated with him. So, and Kappa being largely oblivious to it, right? He seems largely oblivious to a lot of the interpersonal dynamics that are happening on the crew. So yeah. And I also wonder, apparently there was going to be some kind of subplot romance between, there kind of is, but
with Cassie,
yeah,
I wonder.
Yeah, they were really going to stress that, and maybe there initially was going to be like a love triangle, which would have added an additional element to their to their relationship.
I'm glad it wasn't there.
No, totally. I totally
don't need it.
Agree. Yeah, I totally.
Yeah, it was a little bit of an awkward scene, right, where he wakes up from the dream and she's there, and it's
yeah.
unclear whether they're romantically involved or she's just there or whatever's going on. So yeah, that definitely felt like post-production edited out.
Yeah,
footage,
I kind of just thought of it though, because at first I was like, oh, they're dating, and then it didn't seem like they followed that through, and I was like, oh, and then I thought about it as like that weird intimacy you get right away when you live at, Justin didn't do this because he didn't live in a dorm room his freshman year of college, but like all of a sudden you're just like all living together and you're just like, yeah, I'll have like my boyfriend over and you have your boyfriend over. We'll just have a 4-way sleepover. Like that's normal. That's how normal people act, right? Like we don't need personal space. I imagine being on a spaceship would be a similar experience.
Yeah, it was. I lived in a co-ed dorm my freshman year, and it was shocking to me, like just how familiar people got within like weeks.
Yes.
Like you just go to any room and like anyone would be on anyone's bed and it wasn't anything suggestive.
Oh yeah.
It was just sort of like you're just living in this like giant, somewhat disgusting space, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably right. Like that probably might be normal when you're on like a spaceship with like tiny living quarters or whatever. Right?
I think in some sense you have to do that because you're all living together 2-3 to a room. It's like you're basically in like, I don't know, I would think of it like a hovel, but you would call it a dorm.
It was awesome, and you just don't like fun.
No,
calm down.
Yeah, there's a reason I didn't live in the dorms because I needed some space from other human beings.
Justin would lose it. Justin would just lose it in like a common bathroom.
Oh,
yeah. Spaceships are not for you.
No spaceship, dude. How long would I last on this? I would last 1 day on this spaceship. I'd be like, hey, where's the airlock? I gotta jump out.
They're drinking their urine on the spaceship, Justin. Like all the water is recycled. It's like the poo water is recycled to make the water. This is not the Justin spaceship.
No, I'm not. Is that true? They were drinking the poo water? Is that made clear?
Yeah, she said something about there's a line about recycled water.
Okay,
so like what are they recycling it from? Right? Like
yeah.
It's if it's recycled water, I think it's water from a use. So it's like cooking, showering, plumbing. Like there's only it's take your pick, man. It's not great.
I'm not taking that pick. Vishal, I refuse. I refuse to take that pick. I can't. Oh God. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I derailed us by comparing it to a dorm room because that was. But
well, I want to. Here's what I want to talk about.
The intimacy that he and Cassie had, that casual intimacy that's not sexual, reminded me of college.
Well, here's what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Something very similar to experiencing just the intimacy and confronting that, and for me, that would be like confronting the devil and trying to reconcile with that and get my head around that. But one of the interesting themes of the movie is there's this kind of confrontation with the enormity of existence and like the vastness of space and the sun, the size and energy and power of the sun and what it does to us. And I really love this theme of the movie because it's like, a lot of movies that, especially the ones we mentioned, like 2001, Alien, so on, space movies, they really force you in this headspace of like, yeah, man, space is big. But the characters don't totally like grapple with that. They don't like, you don't see that as like a character development point of like, yeah, there's some dude having an existential crisis with the fact that, our existence is minuscule in comparison to everything that there is. But in this movie, this happens. It happens to a number of characters, including the central villain of the movie, whose name is Pinbacker. But I wonder about that experience. Like, I first of all, I'm just fascinated by it, but I wonder like what exactly is happening, because you see this with the Searle, the psychologist. So he's been going into this observation room and sort of looking at the sun in, varying degrees of shade or whatever. They shade it so that you can sort of see the sun but not hurt your eyes. And you start to see, like, first of all, he loves it. He gets in there and he's enjoying it. But you see him, like, he's obviously been in there over and over again. He's getting sunburns and blisters on his skin and his lips. He's constantly wearing sunglasses. Even when they're like going into like darkness, he's wearing sunglasses. Like, he's, really in bad shape.
Hey, Chris, how close is this to full brightness?
At this distance of 36 million miles, you are observing the sun at 2% of full brightness.
2%? Can you show me 4%?
4% would result in irreversible damage to your retinas.
I was thinking, like, it's a really interesting idea that, like, you would become, if you were to see the sun at that, magnitude, you would become obsessed with it. And what is that obsession? Is it just an obsession with, like, experiencing, that power? Or is it an obsession with feeling insignificant? Right? Because I imagine you would feel quite insignificant. It's a bit like confronting, like, a kind of like God-like entity. And it's not a terrestrial experience. It's not something we can have, stuck on Earth. It's only something you can have in the vastness of space. And I think that that's just a fascinating idea, and it sort of grounds this movie, and it becomes the motivation for a lot of what ends up happening. So Vishal, I mean, you talked about this being like, they're going to reignite the sun. That's fucking awesome. But let's talk about the sun. I mean, what's your take on the dying sun?
Yeah, I thought of it as so. I mean, maybe another interesting thing that I actually hadn't noticed until the rewatch last night was just like everything is framed as a retina, right? Like it's the sun, and then the everything is just a contact lens, right? Everything has that like contact lens type shape, right? The ship is designed that way. The solar panels, a ton of the scenes, right, just like cut, and it just looks like a retina, right? It's just an eye, right? I think I think your read of it is the read we're supposed to have, right? Which is this is some sort of godlike experience, some sort of like, the universe is bigger than us all. But it was also sort of this like obsession with like, I am seeing something that no one else will be able to see the sun this close. And I'm going to see the sun this close because no one else will ever be able to see this. And I want to remember it and see it, right? And then it's just the retina iconography all throughout the film, right? So I'm sort of like, okay, there's something about just like putting your eyes on something, seeing something and stuff. And I think, the Pinbacker character maybe sort of takes that, towards your reading of it, right? Which is that he's seeing the mind of God, right? And that seems to be like what people are looking at, or the universe, or whatever sort of greater power that they're thinking of, right? And they've seen that. But that weird obsession with sort of like, I'm going to see literally something that like no one else has seen. That's why I want to like turn up the notch a little bit, right? I want to like, like even if like, oh, can I do 3.5% if I put some shades on? Like, let's try that. Like, I want to see this thing up close and personal that we're going to like, go to because it's, the source of life and all of these things, right? So it is people having a spiritual, one read of it is people having a spiritual moment. Another read of it is just like in our Instagram world, it's just like, this is the best place to take a selfie. Right? Like no one is going to have that selfie. No one is going to have that selfie, right? So
it is interesting, to that point, Vishal, nobody takes a picture of it, right? They just experience it, which is kind of interesting that it's like a sacred moment that they like, nobody sullies it. Like, if you think about it, like, if this movie were today, I think the audience would be confused why they don't all have their cell phones out taking photographs of the, right? But
like, how do you even take a photo? It would be like the most like blah photo. You know what I mean? It would never capture the experience.
They do. There is a little bit of like a tourist, like, remember they all go to the observation deck to see Mercury, right? And the captain who, by the way, we should talk about Sinead. Like, he's awesome, right? Like, we should talk about him a little bit. Like, it's a really great turn, but he like opens it up, right? Like, he's like, ladies and gentlemen, Mercury, right? It's like a little bit of a show. Like, it's performative, which is like a little bit more of like it's almost like they're on a cruise ship or something. Right? And then that sort of that experience. And like, I guess at that point in the movie, nothing's gone wrong. So they think they're dropping the bomb and coming home. So they're like, why not see the sights along the way, right?
It must be what it was like for the first explorers, like the first people in Antarctica, the first people in the North Pole and the South Pole, to just, I'm the first person to set foot here. No one else has seen this. Very few people will ever see this. And yeah, what a strange, and it could be what it partially motivates people to do these wild things. Because that's another question, is like, how do you, like, who volunteers for this mission? And maybe it is the kind of person, like you're saying, Vishal, who wants to see something no one else will ever see. Like they're like an inherent explorer.
Yeah, it's like, who do you send on this mission, right? Like who, like Justin's not going.
I'm not going.
He doesn't want to drink the pee,
no.
right?
No, I'm not doing
like, I mean,
Sorry.
like who's, like they're like, Justin, you're the best we have. You have to go to space.
I'd be like, we're gonna die.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Humanity
I
is
wonder.
gonna die.
I wonder if
Sorry.
they,
You're like, look what happened
if they chose young people because they wouldn't have kids. Like, is it really hard?
Connections. Yeah, connections to people back home.
They're talking about their parents and their sister. He says kiss the kids to his sister, but he doesn't have any kids.
Yeah.
And if push comes to shove and they know they're not having oxygen to come back, like they're gonna do what they need to do, and that's not gonna be. Maybe the thought is like that's a less hard decision if you don't have as intense connections back home. Of course, everybody has connections back home, but yeah.
I mean, Mace clearly does, right? Like he was getting ready to like throw punches over not being able to send his message home. So
Yeah.
It's true, but then
like,
he's but he's also willing to sacrifice himself. It's interesting. He has some connection, but he's willing. He just is. He's willing to, I don't know, transcend it. Let me ask you this. I just am not sure what to think about that. Do you think of that as an admirable or virtuous trait? Or do you think of that as like kind of psychopathic?
I mean, I think it's admirable in the dire circumstances of the entire world being at stake. But in everyday life, psychopathic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's sort of it's the premise of the person on a mission movie, right? Like it's like in some sense, like, the platonic form of a heroic action, right? Like doing something that you're not going to come back from. Although it's not clear that they know they're not going to come back, right? There comes a point where they realize that. But
no, totally.
When they leave, they think they're coming back, right? They're like, okay, this is like carefully planned out. NASA's thought of everything. Like we're coming back. I don't know. I mean, I've been recently watching this like 100-foot wave surfing documentary, and just like that person is a psychopath. Right? Like he's just a psychopath. And I was thinking a lot about like we shouldn't celebrate this. Like we shouldn't lionize this, right? And like sort of celebrate. Like he's just like he's encouraging people to like go out on 100-foot waves, most of whom like probably aren't skillful enough to like handle it, right? And I was thinking about that in contrast to this movie that I'm like, yeah, but you know what? Like all these people have to have some of this in them. Yeah. Like they have to be a little bit like psychopathic like this to like feel like you're going to go do this, right? Because it's like, like this thing has already been, and it's not even like, oh, it like, it's almost better to be on the first ship because you don't know that things can fail. Like this has already gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you already have the template in front of you and you know it's bad. So you gotta be really psychopathic to get on the second ship, right? Like to be like, I've already seen that like people don't come back from this, right? So
I mean, so the other, just on your point about, I don't know, can you name the 100-foot wave documentary? What's it called?
It's actually called 100-foot wave.
Okay. So I haven't seen it, but I have seen Free Solo and, Alex Honnold, the like climber guy.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
That there is, I think there's this two poles there where we feel like, okay, there's something virtuous about this. He's pursuing the ultimate expression of human perseverance and, aesthetic beauty of like conquering and overcoming and the greatness of his climbing and all that. He's doing something amazing that no one else has done. Yet, he's putting himself at incredible risk and thus putting in jeopardy all of these personal relationships that he has, treating them as less significant to this goal. And there's something very troubling, I think, about that as well. So there's this kind of push and pull. And I see that in a character like Mace in particular. I feel like he's the distillation of that because, in the moment, he's like, I will die. It does not matter. I will die because we're going to save everyone, right? He's like, that's fine. But of course, in dying, he is sacrificing those relationships, right? His family doesn't want him to do that, obviously. But he makes that choice in that moment willingly without any regret. And so, but there's something admirable about that too at the same time, right? There's something that we think of as like, yeah, that is that kind of self-sacrifice is, it's like Mother Teresa level, right? It's this like a willingness to like give completely of yourself and sacrifice the things that you personally value for the good of everyone else. But I don't know where I come down. I mean, I'm someone who, as we've already described, would not be on this mission in the first place. And I think, if these guys are heroes and brave, I'm incredibly cowardly by comparison. I would just accept my fate. And I don't want to like rationalize that decision, but I do think there's also something to that. And I suspect that something like that is going on with Pinbacker, right? So, Pinbacker, the bad guy, has like looked into the sun. He's all burned up. And he seems to think maybe we should just go extinct. Maybe humanity's just not meant to continue on. And that's kind of, this is the end.
At the end of time, a moment will come when just one man remains. Then the moment will pass. Man will be gone. There will be nothing to show that we were ever here but stardust. The last man, alone with God. Am I that man?
And now you might think, okay, well, that's insane. Like, of course, we should continue on and try our best to save everyone. But you could also think like, yeah, the universe is telling us something. We're not meant for it anymore. And there's something about sort of stoically accepting that fate that is, I think, also admirable about just being like, you know what? It's game over. I just need to like make my peace with that. Now, he does a little bit more than that.
I was going to say, he could have just stayed at home. Instead, he gets on the ship to save the world.
No.
Sabotages
He has that realization when he's on Icarus.
I understand. I'm just saying.
He sabotages Icarus 2, though, which is a little more...
He sabotages Icarus 1 as well.
Yeah, well...
Yeah, he pulled the computer
no,
out the
totally.
coolant.
Yeah.
He does the same move twice. He's got a one move, the coolant move.
He's good at the coolant.
Yeah.
But
are we sure Pinbacker's real?
Oh well, yeah.
Yeah, are we sure? That's a read on it. Actually, since the first movie, like the first time we saw it, I've been thinking about like, wait, well, was he real or was this like
whose just manifestation is it then?
It's collectively they're all doing it.
They're all like low on oxygen and like
they're all just like like they're all like getting ready to like do all kinds of insane stuff because the pressure is getting to them, right? So like Mace is like, because it's not like totally clear like how has Pinbacker just been like alive? If he's been staring into the sun, he's all burned up. Like, shouldn't he be like dead or blind at the very least? Right? But he's able to. Like,
what was he? I guess they like explained they could be still living because they've got enough like resources and stuff.
He has the resources.
Like, but yeah, like if you pull on his arm, it's his skin falls off. As we found out, so like. How is he not? If he stubs his toe, wouldn't he just like fall apart?
It is also true that whenever nobody can kind of look at him directly because the camera is all obscured. We'll talk a bit about that later.
So cool.
But it's sort of like nobody can like glimpse him directly, which suggests maybe he is kind of some sort of subconscious manifestation of what though? Like of a kind of is it a self-sabotage? Is it like a we've all collectively come to the Pinbacker realization that like we're doomed, so we're going to self-sabotage, or what do you think it is?
Yeah, just sort of the idea that like they got here, they saw the sun, and now like none of them can like come out and say that they don't want to execute the mission, but they're all just sort of like it's all just like there, and they're like in like the lower reaches of their mind, and it's this like collective psychosis that takes over. That's just like, I don't know. It's sort of I kept thinking, I'm like, is this guy real? Or it's just like in their heads.
I mean, that's an interesting read. That is an interesting read. And I think, they were thinking of him as like a kind of, he's a manifestation of fundamentalism. And there's this kind of science versus religious fundamentalism thing going on. But that works as well if it's internal to each character, right? It's a battle within each character to remain committed to the mission or kind of have this, I don't know, religious epiphany where they like, throw out all of their empirical science and just embrace this strange mythology of like, we all need to die.
I mean, because even for scientific people, this is a moment of, I don't know if faith is the right word and stuff like that, right? But he describes this as like a big bang, right?
Yeah.
Like sort of like basically the big bang all over again, right? So even for physicists and even for like the hardcore scientists, right? Like this little play of like, well, we're going to like reignite the star that started it all is like kind of a like going back to the start, right? Going back to the origin. So there's got to be some sort of level of like, this is beyond our science now, right? This is beyond our ability to think about this, right?
In fact, actually, Kappa says explicitly that. He's like, all the science behind the bomb is theoretical. They're like, is it going to work? He's like, I don't know. We don't know because we've never detonated one of these things. So you're right, Vishal. It is at the very reaches of human knowledge. And they're, of course, at the very reaches of human exploration. No human has ever got to this point. So they're in the kind of unknown territory. And and so thinking about it, like what happens to you as just psychologically when you reach that unknown, when you come face to face with the limits of human knowledge and experience, I could believe that would really mess you up and cause a lot of introspecting and a lot of complicated reassessing of things you held dear and valuable, now suddenly being thrown into relief, and you think, maybe this doesn't really matter. I mean, I always liked thinking of like that as what happened to Pinbacker. Is basically he saw the sun, realized, oh, humankind, we're just like ants. We're just like specks floating. I think they say that we're just like specks in the void or whatever. We're just like these little insignificant things. Like, what right do we have to try to do this? Like, we're nothing really. And it's a little bit like, I think, confronting, God and what that would be like, and feeling how insignificant you would feel next to the power of your creator.
And because he says that, right? This is like from dust to dust, right? We came from this dust and we'll go back to it. Which is that a biblical passage? I do not know my Bible.
Yeah, ashes to ashes, dust to dust is
dust to dust. Yeah. So I mean, they sort of hint around that. The other thing I was thinking of along this line of sort of like reaching that outer edge of the thing, like, what would you as a scientist think if you like plan this like complicated mission, you drop the bomb and it didn't work? Like, would it be like, wait, like all the science we know is wrong? Like, right? Like, presumably they have a high degree of like enough of a certainty that they're going to like pull this off, right? Or they're going to go do this. So like all the scientists in the world think that this is going to work, right? But like maybe you're getting there, you're starting to get nervous. Like, what if this doesn't work? Or like, what if like you can't just reignite a star? Like there's no, I mean, like obviously this is like Hollywood science, right? There's no good, like actual like science around any of this. But I don't know, just sort of thinking about that as well as like all these like physicists and like these really presumably smart people like are going to go do this thing. And like, what if they dropped the bomb and it didn't work? Like, what would that do to someone's like belief system?
Right. It would cause a crisis of faith in a way, right? To have your experiment, that thing that you've based your entire worldview around, we might suppose, fail to sort of replicate, right? Fail to be confirmed by the empirical world. You would think, well, now I have to refigure my entire worldview. And that's going to be really hard. It's going to be hard to deal with. I mean, that in a sense is what I think might be happening to Pinbacker and to some of the other people as they're looking into the sun. Is they're sort of like reorienting their entire value system, because they're like, oh yeah, they're, like we aren't that important. And so that's causing this sort of reevaluation and causing them to like shift their worldview. And so I sort of see Pinbacker, whether or not he's a manifestation of them, I see him as this guy who has gone through something. Like, he was a normal dude before that. And then he went through this wild experience that led him to be a completely different person on the other side. And that could have been any of us, right? Any person could have gone through that. It wasn't like he's some bad guy to begin with or anything. It just affected him in this way, and it could have affected any of us in that way. And I like that. I like that about that it makes the villain not this like mustache twirling, dastardly guy who, but rather just like a normal dude who just looked at the sun too much.
Back to Laura's point about like, this is why your mom tells you not to look.
Don't look at the sun.
Don't look at it, man.
Guys,
the ozone layer is depleted.
I love this idea that Pinmaker is not real. I had not thought about that at all. I just totally yes, I thought it would be crazy that he would survive as messed up as he was, but I was sort of just there for the ride with it. But I was just thinking about, not only this sort of bigger picture mind bending stuff that you'd be going through on this spaceship and looking at the sun, but also just the physical realities of being on a spaceship for as long as they have been, right? Whenever they sort of go loony, they have to go to the Earth room and watch images of Earth.
It's a bit like you, Laura, when you're spending so much time indoors in the pandemic. You have to go to the
how
Earth
I don't
room
feel like
and
a
walk
human
around.
being sometimes in when I am with my family, my loved ones, and I have access to the sun. Obviously they have access to the sun, but not in the same way. I don't think
they have too much access to the sun. They don't have access to rain.
It's dark all the time, right? Are they? Maybe they get their vitamin D by just looking at the sun for 10 seconds and they get all their vitamin D, but you know what I mean? Their circadian rhythms have to be all fucked up. Their bodies are losing strength because they don't have the same kind of gravity, maybe. It's just gotta be really, really, really uncomfortable, and you would feel unmoored.
Well, here's another thing. You only have 4 rooms to go to. You got the mess hall, you got your cabin, you got the ship, cockpit.
That is how I feel.
And then you got the botany space. Yeah. And so it's you after you've gone to the 4 spots, you're just man, I got to do 4 more years of walking between these 4 spots
with the same people.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That you didn't pick. That aren't your chosen family. You know. God.
You don't choose your family, Laura.
Don't I know it? I think the movie, though, I was noticing just in the styling, there's no conversation about ugh, man, this is really, we've been here a really long time. I think they make jokes about the food or whatever, but just in making Rose Byrne, who is a strikingly beautiful woman, look tired and pallid.
Yeah.
And they all have terrible hair, because Chris Evans does end up shaving it because he's told to, but I'm man, why did they put that horrible wig on him? And then I was oh, right. Because they don't have hairdressers in space. They're either
why did they tell me to get a haircut? I found that interesting. It's the prescription was okay, you got to go to the holodeck and go to the Earth the VR room. You need to go get a haircut.
I think it was just self-care. I think he's in a rut. I think he's just he's not even looking after his own personal hygiene. And the guy's just snap out of it, man. We got work to do. Got your hair.
Yeah, go shave your head like a Marine.
Yeah.
Right? It'll make you feel better. I also thought it was hilarious that he wanted waves crashing. He's this is what makes me calm.
He's an intense dude.
Yeah, maybe.
He's an intense dude. It's oh, do you want birds or something? He's no. These
more
waves violently crashing against the rocks and this family around it. It's that's what's making me feel at peace. I'm
yeah.
Right,
I don't know. That didn't surprise me because I feel our toddler would be more. That's what he would want in the Earth room too.
He's like an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah.
Right? That's the kind of vibe I get from him. Is he'd be he's going to be driving fast, right? He's going to be getting in his Tesla and going to 0-60 in 2 seconds. Which of the character? Okay, so there's also a religious component to this movie, and there's this. I was thinking of it there are different. Obviously, we have 3 Asian characters, 3 Chinese characters, and actually no, Kaneda's Japanese, Michelle Yeoh and Benedict Wong are Chinese, and then you have all those the Westerners, right? But there is elements of spirituality throughout. I noticed this actually when you get to Michelle Yeoh's death, she sort of finds this leaf growing in the dirt or whatever, and she is almost immediately, she's whoa, this is amazing. Life will find a way. And then she's immediately killed by Pinbacker. But then there's it goes back to her. There's a shot of her in the destroyed, botany
Oxygen
place.
garden.
And she's sort of sitting cross-legged with cradling the thing.
Yeah.
That felt like Buddha, right? That felt, that's Buddha imagery right there, right? So I did feel there was a lot of, they were kind of highlighting different elements of spirituality throughout the film. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about Pinbacker as talks about I'm going to look in the mind of God, and he sort of sees the sun as God. And actually, interestingly, I saw that Cillian Murphy was an agnostic, and then during the course of filming, he became an atheist. which is fascinating to me because I don't know what about this movie would have compelled him to become an atheist, but the characters in the movie are generally secular. I mean, they're all scientists, right? So what's the closest thing that a scientist has to like a god-like entity is the universe writ large. And of course, the sun being the center of our solar system is the source of all organic life that we know of. And so you think like, okay, the sun kind of is a god, right? And you know, historically, people worship the sun as a god. But of course, the sun in this case is dying. So if you think about it, it's like, oh, okay, so this is like a society, much like our own, where like God has achieved less. There's like less God in the world, right? Like God plays less of a role in people's lives. We're more of a secular atheistic society. I mean, at least more than we were 100 years ago. But then their role is to reignite the sun. So their role is to, if you think of it from that perspective, their role is to reignite faith, a kind of religious faith or spiritual faith or whatever you even think about it. But it's also a little bit like an inversion of, in order to save the fall of mankind in the Christian tradition, God sacrifices himself vis-a-vis his son, which is himself. But here, mankind is to sacrifice themselves to save God. So it's like an inversion of the central theme of the New Testament. So I thought that was interesting. You could think of it almost like as like a kind of parable for what was lost, what ends up being lost in a kind of atheistic society, and what needs to then be regained to sort of, you know, anchor ourselves back to our core humanity, which is some sort of belief in some sort of higher entity, right? Like, but then there's the danger, of course, of that getting out of control, right? And with Pinbacker, right? Pinbacker he's this like fundamentalist who twists that spirituality and that religiosity, and he gets it all confused, and it becomes anti-humanistic, right? So there's this kind of thought of, no, we need the spirituality to like reconnect to humanity, to bring humanity back from the brink. But it has to be one that's sort of guided ultimately by human principles, ultimately by humanistic principles, not guided by this kind of pure fundamental adherence to whatever one guy has decided. So I thought it was an interesting blend or hybridizing of the kind of religious faith and these secular humanistic principles that are governing the sort of people in the ship. It's like a sort of suggestion that we kind of need both, maybe, to thrive.
Pinbacker's view is that if we need to do all like God like let the sun die for a reason, right? Like it's almost like where he gets back to, right? Sort of like if we gotta go drop a nuclear bomb and we don't even know if it's gonna work and all that. Like this is our lot in life. Like we just need to like stars die, right? Stars don't live forever; they die, and this is just ours happens to be dying, and you know, so that's our lot in life. So because wouldn't that be the religious or maybe like the religious read on this is sort of like, yeah, if the sun's dying, it's because God just like he just thinks it's time for the sun to die, right?
That's what you were.
Yes. Sorry. What are you staring at me for?
Well, I'm staring at you because you said that to me like 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Jump in on this.
Yeah. No. I was thinking about it.
What am I? I gotta do everything here. Come on. This was you said the same idea. Jump on this.
Oh my God. I was thinking about this movie. I didn't realize Alex Garland wrote it. And so I was thinking about the thematic connections with Ex Machina and this question of like how far we push science to the point of like trying to trying to become gods ourselves. And the idea, I got distracted just because I was looking up the myth of Icarus because I was like, what was he doing flying close to the sun? I was trying to figure out if he was like trying to become a god or something, but he was trying to escape Crete. But all the same, he's trying to fly when he cannot fly by engineering wings, and then he gets too close to the sun. It's a funny name for the ship. But yeah, I think there's like just because there's a question of just because we can do something, should we do something? And are we pushing science so far that we are, trying to violate the laws of nature or God? Which is something that Ex Machina grapples with the idea of creating a artificial human life and an artificial woman with feelings and consciousness, and not thinking through the consequences of doing that, therefore bringing our own doom upon ourselves because of the hubris of man thinking that we can do it all with science.
Yeah. I mean, this is like a very Garland theme, right? Of just sort of like, what are we doing? And like going into the like crossing some threshold upon which like what we know no longer makes sense, right? Or like, like we push science to its limit. So like now there's like, where are we after that, right? which is I personally didn't like Annihilation. I wasn't a huge fan of that movie, but I like his ideas. I thought Annihilation had a lot of interesting ideas that didn't ultimately come together for me. But
I mean, to your point though, Vishal, that kickstarted this, there is a kind of the resigned religious person, and then there's the like active religious person. So the resigned religious person sees it like this is God's plan. We need to just be resigned and accept it on faith that this is what's best for humankind, is to just die, right? There's an afterlife, and so we'll be fine. The active religious person might say something like, well, no, I mean, God presents us with challenges, and those challenges reveal our faith and our goodness, right? We have to overcome those challenges. And this is a challenge God presented us, so we have to overcome it. So there's that, there are ways of like taking the quest and whatever, in different ways, right? And so you have a framework within which you can go. And I think that what I kind of get out of it is that there's this danger though of fundamentalism. There's this danger of like one man decides, right? That's what happened with Pinbacker. He just decided we're all going to die. This is how it's going to go down. Whereas the group in Icarus 2, they vote. Right? They decide by committee. There's never really one person deciding. There's always, there's this thought that Mace puts forward when they're making that pivotal vote, which is that we have to be unanimous, and that it ends up being overruled. But nonetheless, there's still a majority rule on the decision to kill Trey. And then earlier, the decision is what they decide is kind of pseudo-democratically to offload that decision about whether to go to Icarus 1. They offload that decision to the physicists because they're like, well, look, he's the one who's sort of best positioned to know what to do. But that's, again, that decision about how to decide is done basically democratically. Nobody objects to that being the way they decide. So there is this kind of like, we do it as a group. And then there's the danger of like one person deciding. That's what happens with Pinbacker. And so I think that's kind of, that's interesting, right? I think there's that theme there throughout that like we need, religion is great and we need to have these interpretive conversations, but it needs to be something that we do together, not sort of one person unilaterally who then shoots it all down to the masses and says, this is what we now must do.
Who do you think, if this were to really happen, right, or if this decision was in front of us today, who do you think objects to this? Somebody does, right? Like somebody on Earth objects to sending the mission, right?
Like which political group?
Yeah, like which political group or which like somebody is going
conservers are going to be like, it costs too much money.
But there are religious groups too that like, are there's a lot of wringing of hands about the things that were like cloning and or even medicine, right? This is smaller groups of some people who feel like it's deviating from just the natural God's plan. So I'm sure there would be people who feel like to try and reignite the sun would be counter to God's plan.
And there's a lot of people who, this is a real thing. There's a lot of people who, like a lot of religious people, and these are not like the minority groups here that think like climate change is just, that's part of God's plan. So we just need to like go with it. And I think that drives some of the resistance, weirdly to, to interventions. But yeah, I know. So I think that's a similar kind of situation.
Right. Because some of the things that we'll have to do to fight climate change, if we can, are like launching gases into the ozone layer to try and repair it, like some reignite the sun kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's also going to be like, there's someone out there who's like, see, global warming is fake. It's really cold on Earth in this science fiction utopia.
I know.
It's like, see, Danny Boyle said it himself. Like, it's going to get really cold. It's not warming.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, day after tomorrow, it's cold, man. Come on.
It's cold, guys. Come on.
Vishal, have you seen Contact?
Yes.
Or read it?
Yeah.
So Contact, I think, is in a way the prequel to this movie. And because it shows you the complexity of deciding what to do when there's this like world-shaking cataclysmic thing about to happen or a changing event. That in case, which is like we've been contacted by aliens, but like same thing where now we have to get all these groups together and decide like how we're going to figure out how to manage this. And there's, there's people protesting and so on. So I think Contact in a way is a nice, if you want to think about that issue, that plays out in Contact.
Where does this sit with your guy Nolan's Interstellar? Where does this sit for Justin?
In terms of ranking?
Like this is like Interstellar's kind of the same movie, right? It's kind of the like, Earth is in dire straits. We're sending a mission. these people need to go. Like, where does this land? You're a big Nolan guy. So.
Yeah. So I want to know this answer for you, Vishal, because I think my answer is going to be really obvious, and everyone who listens to this podcast is going to know where I'm going to come down on it. And that is, I'm going with Nolan. But that said, the parts, they're doing kind of different things, right? So the Nolan movie almost does nothing with respect to like how hard this is on the crew and their journey and that kind of thing. Right?
They just cryo sleep until they get to where they need to be.
There's no interpersonal stuff in Nolan. And when there is some interpersonal stuff, it's kind of cheesy. It's borderline cheesy.
What's cheesy about saying that love is the only perceived? What do you mean? It's the only thing that we can perceive that's capable of transcending space and time. What's cheesy about that, Justin? I love this movie. To be clear, I love Interstellar, and I want it to be 5 hours long, and I want more dust and corn, and I'm there for it. I love it.
What I'm trying to say is the interpersonal conflicts that take center stage in this movie are handled much better. There's more depth to them. It's more interesting.
Yeah.
The interpersonal conflicts, insofar as there are any in Interstellar, aren't great.
But you mean in the crew, not like the emotional core.
Well, sure, there's an emotional core, and there's not that much emotional core in this movie.
Yes.
But I'm talking about the interpersonal conflicts among the crew and decide, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with you. The Matt Damon stuff in Interstellar is kind of cheesy, right?
It's a good point that is in there. That there is some.
He's the pinbacker?
Yeah, he is the pinbacker.
Yeah, he's the pinbacker, right? He's the pinbacker. It's cheesier, right? I do agree with you. Like, I feel like the interpersonal relationships are more nuanced and more subtle here. So I really like Interstellar too, and I'm generally a Nolan fan. Tenet really pushing the limits of that, but it's sort of like generally where I'm at. I was thinking about this a lot yesterday because I was sort of like, gosh, this is like I'm thinking about, I don't know, as I was rewatching, I was thinking a lot about Interstellar. I think I like this more than Interstellar.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Ooh.
That's fascinating. I can see it.
I know. I'm probably with two huge Interstellar fans here, but
it's okay. It's okay. I get it.
I think I do agree with Laura in the sense that like I don't think Sunshine tells as crisp and as clear of this like love transcends space time, right? Like there's like a principle there that's like, almost objectively unassailable, right? But I don't know if Justin will find a way, I'm sure. Something there, and like there's no grand principle like that, like sort of like very explicitly stated in Sunshine.
Yeah.
I just think it's a tighter movie. I think it's a tighter movie.
It is.
I think it does what it does.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's ever called Interstellar tight.
Yeah.
No,
3 hours long.
It's an opera. And it's like everything is so big and like, it's not a subtle movie.
Yeah, and it's just out there, right? And I'm like, this just like does Sunshine kind of like touches on some of the same themes, I think.
It does, yeah.
In a much tighter, like more compact way. But give me the case against that. Give me the case for Interstellar.
I don't think I think it's a personal thing. No, I think it's a personal thing. Here's how I would describe the difference in the movies. So Sunshine is more in the vein of tripping out and being like, wow, this like shit is weird. And Interstellar is more in the vein of like, let's go to physics class and learn about how crazy the universe is, right? And you're still getting the same thing. The universe is wild, but in totally different ways. Like Interstellar is going to have a scene where somebody explains how time dilation works and two-dimensional objects can be perceived, three-dimensional objects can be perceived by two-dimensional beings, and you can explain, there's somebody explaining that to you. This movie has none of that. And that's to its credit. This is a very different thing that it's doing. This movie is more like take acid and look at the sun, and it's fucking crazy, and you're going to have a religious experience.
Yeah.
There's not really the same kind of religious experience, although there is a little bit in Interstellar.
But it's so heady. It's so intellectual.
It's more like when you have a religious experience, like looking at, like when you kind of begin to grok the basics of like quantum mechanics, and you're like, whoa, this is wild. But like, it's not the same sort of purely, visual auditorial experience of just like seeing the sun.
Yeah, it's definitely more like explicit and like hits you over the head with it in Sunshine, right? In Interstellar, though, I think it gets to the same place, right? The way you framed it, I think is right. It's sort of like the conclusion is the universe is wild, and this shit kind of like it's kind of turtles all the way down, so to speak, right? Like at some point, it just feels like there's nothing else we can explain here, right? But Interstellar takes you through the logical, the
it's more
philosopher's
logical.
reasoning.
That's
Yeah,
right.
sort of like, okay, like A to B to C to D, whatever. Whereas Sunshine is very much sort of like, look, we're just going to go to Z. Don't ask about all the letters in between.
You did want a case though for Interstellar. I'll give you one, and I'll let Laura give another one. Okay.
I don't have
No. I know what you're gonna give. I'll tee you up for it.
Okay, I was gonna say I don't know what I'm gonna
the case that I give. The case I give for it is, when at the point when there are two. I mean, has there been a more just wild sequence of things than one when they go into the wormhole for the first time, and two when they're doing the ship docking? I mean, that's just like the spinning ship docking thing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That when I saw that in theater, my mind was like melting. I was like, this is so overwhelming, and that is amazing. That's one case for it. The other case, though, is, and this is just to set up Laura. Then there's also like once he goes into the black hole and you're into Tesseract, and I mean that's just amazing. It's so like wildly inventive, and your mind is being stretched because you're trying to now figure out like, okay, how's this connecting to what was happening earlier, and how is this a representation of time? It's this 3D representation of a 4D time space, and you're just like, you're trying to get your head around it. I find that immensely satisfying and cool. But the other pitch, I'm just going to set Laura up, I'll let you take on, is there is a deep emotional core in Interstellar. And there's a sequence. So when we talked to Tom Schoen, actually, he talked a bit about this. He's the guy who wrote the Nolan Variations. We were talking about Inception, but he said that and this is in the book actually too, but there's a scene in Interstellar. So Vishal, you know the scene when Matthew McConaughey has lost, I don't know, I think it's 30 years of time because he's been down on that like water planet. And he's now getting all of the transmissions that over 30 years, he's been down there for like 2 hours. And now he's come up, and all of a sudden 30 years have passed. And he watches his kids grow up and have kids. And he watches that happen in about a 5-minute sequence. And just watching what happens on Matthew McConaughey's face during that sequence, the way Tom Schoen described it is it's an emotion that he had never had before. And he said it was almost impossible to describe. He said it's a combination of experiencing the enormity of the universe distilled down into a concrete thing. Because you're realizing, wow, time is this thing that I can't control. It's completely, and it's bigger than anything that I can imagine. And I'm just confronting that now for the first time. And two, you're watching this, incredibly personal thing happen. So you're seeing this guy realize the time he's lost in real time, go through that, and you're thinking about that for yourself. Like, what would it be to think I'm never going to have that time with my kids ever? And so there's this mixture of like all this regret and confrontation within the enormity of the universe, and experiencing the inexplicable, and just being like overwhelmed by it all. And I think there are very few films that have been able to get something like that across. And I feel like that is, Interstellar does that. That's an amazing thing. I don't know. That's an achievement to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that, anyway, the core, that emotional core of Interstellar between McConaughey and the daughter, Murph, his daughter. I mean, I think that's a pitch potentially also for Interstellar.
Yeah. I mean, I think I love Nolan movies, and I mean, it's a Stockholm syndrome because I live with Justin, and like, how could I not love Nolan movies? But they are, they're intellectual movies that don't always resonate for me emotionally. And Interstellar does. So it's one of my favorite Nolan movies, I think, for that reason. I feel like a lot of his movies are cold in some, and so fun, but sometimes cold. And that's not the case with Interstellar. I do love that movie. I like this movie a lot too. I was thinking about
I don't want to have to choose.
I was thinking about how they, like, both of them in very different ways get at, as you said, like that space, that like the universe is wild and space is wild, and so much of it, I think they do sort of talk about the brutality of space in Interstellar, but you feel like, just temperature wise in Sunshine, of course, there's the crazy hot sun, but also so many people are freezing to death in this movie.
Yeah.
It's like just by the tilt of this, of the what is
the
the
shield
shield,
or whatever, yeah.
right? You're either gonna burst into flames, or you're gonna turn into an ice cube, and then your arm is just gonna like turn into a bunch of blood ice cube like chips, like just flying out into space. That is fucking wild, and that's like a matter of like, I don't know, 50 feet or something in space. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's such a hostile environment.
Yes.
Of like extremes, right?
Yeah.
I think that scene that you're talking about in Interstellar, it's like the closest thing to like astral projection, right?
Yeah.
It's like the closest thing to an out of body experience, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what I was thinking when I saw that scene. I was like, this is what astral projection would be like. Like you go somewhere for 2 hours and you come back and 30 years of your life have gone by and you're just like looking at it because like you're disconnected from the time, right? So it has to feel like an out of body experience because it's sort of like, well, it's only been 2 hours, but it's been 30 hours. So you're having this like out of body experience.
It is one of those scenes that's like that scene. If the rest of the movie was just like Matthew McConaughey on the toilet, I'd be like, this is a 5-star movie. I mean, that scene, that scene is like unbelievable that he was able to take this complicated thing about time dilation that I knew about. Yeah. We all learned the basics of, and
relativity. Put real stakes to it.
Yeah, and put dramatic and emotional stakes on it.
Because that's the problem. I mean, maybe you're compelled by the children's stuff in Inception about Cobb needing getting home to his kids. Maybe you're not, because you're like, why doesn't he just move to France? But like, or move the kids to France. But like, it doesn't. The emotional stakes of like the whole heist of Inception don't hit as hard can never hit as hard as the emotional stakes of Interstellar and what he's lost.
Yes, that's true. Although I will remind you that the emotional stakes of the Fisher confronting his father.
Yes, those are great. Those are great.
That is the part that everyone forgets. That is
I didn't forget it. I brought it up in the episode.
I know, but I'm just saying that we have people, an audience listening, and I just think that's always worth noting. That's a sneaky
does
part of
great work in Inception.
And that's Cillian Murphy, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like he does similar stuff with Dunkirk, right? Dunkirk is similarly like he plays with time, he's very technical and all that. I think there's emotional stakes to Dunkirk, right? When like Tom Hardy lands, like you get the Churchill speech, and I think it is definitely a strong suit of Nolan. He can make you care about things that otherwise would just be like astrophysics nerds sitting in like a lab at MIT somewhere, right? Like it's sort of like he'll bring that to you, front and center. We're also getting solar panels put on the house.
There
right?
you go.
And so like I just was like thinking about this so much, right? I'm like the sun was like, oh my God, because it's smoky here, right? It's like California's going through fire season and stuff. So like I'm definitely feeling I was feeling as I was watching this movie, like both the impacts of climate change, right? Feeling like, oh my gosh, now for the last 5 years, 6 weeks of the summer is this like, I just check this app to see if I can go outside and I put this like mask on and it feels like it almost feels like to me a little bit of like what it must be like for them to do the spacewalk. It's like before we go outside, like we gather up all of our materials. I make sure my kid understands that the filter mask needs to go on. Like all of this stuff needs to go on, right? So like I was thinking about Interstellar and thinking about this. And then I was also thinking about putting solar panels on because we're like trying to like do this whole energy transition thing. Like I want to be off the grid. I want to be able to like produce our own energy. I'm like, what if the sun dies? What if the sun dies? These solar panels, they're not going to work. Like what if it's like, and like they're like, yeah, you got to go up there and you got to clean these solar panels. And I was like, oh my God, it's gonna be like Canada going up there. You're just
gonna turn on your shades and stare at it.
Stare at it. Like what? Like I don't know. It was just that was.
Got to worship it, Vishal. It's the source of all life.
As I was watching the movie yesterday, I was sort of like, holy shit, man! Like Danny Boyle just nailed it. The climate's coming for all of us, and we gotta make sure the sun's all right. Otherwise, we're not gonna be able to live.
Sun got to be all right.
Real.
That's the number one.
For real.
That's number one.
I was like, we need to. So to answer your question, Justin, like somebody needs to go there and drop that bomb because my solar panels need to work. Right?
Vishal, you volunteering?
Oh no, no, 100%.
You don't want to drink your own pee-pee?
You know who would be on that? I'm wearing a shirt
Herzog?
right now. Herzog would be on that trip.
Herzog would be making a documentary about these people.
Sure.
He's an adventurer.
He'd be
right?
like, "Do you think space dreams?"
Yeah, he like this movie really fits. Yeah, it fits the theme in some sense of this, like of the like not the theme, but the central obsession with the guy, the namesake of this podcast, which is people going and doing wild things at their own expense for whatever reason. And he loves that idea. You're totally right. He would be in there with his camera asking them. He'd be like, why did you use ketchup with your French fries? And they'd be like, wait a second, we're like about to reignite the sun. You're interested in the ketchup? That's usually what he is interested in, though. He's interested in weird stuff like the penguin that's going off into the middle of nowhere.
I think about that penguin every single day of my life.
That's Laura's spirit animal, by the way. The penguin in Encounters at the End of the World, who just wanders off into the nowhere, and Herzog narrates it like he's going off to die.
To certain death.
And here he's heading off into the interior of the vast continent. With 5,000 kilometers ahead of him, he's heading towards certain death.
One thing I want to just mention is, so the film is very good classical filmmaking. And one of the things that just one very fascinating part of that is the movie motivates every decision, right? Every point that we have this conflict, it's motivated, and then that leads to this, which is motivated, and so on. But then there's a lot of like setup payoff stuff that I think is really, really great. So, you set up Pinbacker as like this burned guy who's gone crazy by showing all the characters become obsessed with the sun and like getting burned, right? You set up
a little bit of his like sort of Colonel Kurtz like ravings.
Yeah, and the ravings you get on the message and stuff. You set up that the coolant where the mainframe is housed is so cold.
It's very cold.
Because Mace gets a little bit on his arm, on his hand, and he's like, ah! And you see like ice already forming on his hand. And then he has to go in there and you're like, okay, this raises the stakes on that. You see when the guy goes for the weapon, right? I forget who it is that's going for the weapon.
Mace is going to go kill Trey, and there's 2 scalpels missing.
2 scalpels missing. And we find out one of them is that Trey already took it to kill himself. And the other one is taken by Pinbacker, who's using it to go and kill.
Yes, because at that point, we don't yet know he's on the ship. Because my favorite moment of that movie is when Icarus tells him that there's 5 people, not 4 people on the ship.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, it was like a guitar riff in my head. I was just like, fuck yes.
I mean, that's the point when the movie becomes a horror movie, right there.
Yeah, so that's when I became very excited.
Yeah,
right there. I think Gaby and my sister both were just like, oh shit, at the same time, like just audibly. They're just like, oh shit.
Yeah.
It's like, yes.
Holy
and I'm
crap.
just like, yes, this is about to take a turn.
Vishal, I wanted to ask you, because you're such a Boyle fan, I wanted to ask you, where this one falls for you, in your ranking of Danny Boyle movies.
I mean, this to me is my favorite Danny Boyle movie by a long shot, right? I think Trainspotting is really good.
Mm-hmm.
28 Days Later is awesome, but for kind of largely like, I don't know, nerdy reasons, right? Like, I don't know that like, 28 Days Later is a good movie. It's a really good zombie movie, right? But it's not like, it doesn't do what this movie does for me, right? Like I'm sort of like, I like Children of Men. Like I'm just very predisposed to this type of movie. I'm culturally Indian, so like Slumdog Millionaire was like interesting to me, but like didn't rise to this level. Like I could watch this once a year and be fine, right? Like Slumdog Millionaire, I don't think I've ever seen again. 127 Hours was really good. That was pretty good. I did not like Yesterday. I thought Yesterday was, I don't know, I just could not get with it. And I was looking at this list yesterday actually, and Steve Jobs, like to me, it's not even a Danny Boyle movie, because I think like the power of Aaron Sorkin's script is so overwhelming.
Yeah, he does get much more lost in it, because I was thinking about how Fincher still managed to get so much of his stamp on Social Network, whereas Steve Jobs feels 100% like a Sorkin movie. Yeah,
it's like Aaron Sorkin. I always think Aaron Sorkin directed that movie, and then I have to remind myself that Danny Boyle did, right? Like it feels like, but that's a really good point. Is that like Fincher does manage to like keep some Fincherism in the Social Network, right? Like you sort of get his auteur there. But yeah, I think this is my favorite Danny Boyle movie. I think this is a really good one.
I think that's a solid opinion, and I think that for us, it's got to be between this and 28 Days Later. I think that's kind of where we end up. But Laura, tell me your thoughts.
I think it might be above 28 Days Later. I haven't seen 28 Days Later as recently, but I have such an affection for that movie. I love horror movies. I'm not like, zombies are not my favorite genre of horror movies, but it's just so moody, and the score is so effective, and it's so unsettling. And he does so much with so little in that movie, and I have so much affection for it. But this movie is, a more mature, elegant movie. I mean, obviously he had budget for it in a way that he didn't have for 28 Days Later.
No, I mean, he could have shot 28 Days Later on film. He chose not to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it still feels like a more mature film than 28 Days Later. And the ensemble cast is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like it just, the visual effect that he chose to do was Pinbacker, where you can't look at him, like you can't look at the sun, like he's all blurred all the time. It's really cool. So yeah, I think weirdly I saw this movie in 2007 and it made no impression whatsoever on me. And then we watched it last night and I was blown away.
Dual subs though. That's part of the reason.
Dual subs.
Dual subs.
That must have
Dual
been
subs
it.
really adds to if you're just watching this. Yeah, if you're watching this movie on a laptop, it's not going to do it for you. You got to watch it with duals.
No. This is why Justin can't be bothered to put the dishes away, because he's got to calibrate for sunshine.
God, don't
I'm down there calibrate. Hey, if you want to have the best viewing possible viewing experience, then I need 20 minutes to calibrate before we watch the movie. I'm glad, Laura, you brought up the we can't look at Pinbacker thing, because I wanted to get back to that. So, Vishal, do you know how they did that? Have you seen how they did that? Okay, so This is so cool. I remember seeing this when I saw it with you, the movie, and then I saw it several times thereafter, and I watched at one point one of the featurettes, and I showed this part to Laura because it's really, really interesting. So what they did, initially, by the way, I thought that all the weird sort of flares that happen when you look at Pinbacker, I thought that was just added digitally. I was like, or they put something in front of the lens or something. What they did was even more wild. So what they did was they had two cameras, and one camera was pointing at a mirror that was able to like reflect what the first camera was seeing. So they'd get two, shots of identical images. But then the second camera was basically shooting through some kind of prism thing that was just being moved by a guy, a camera operator on set. So all of those flares are organic and being captured in camera. But what they had was they had two images, so that allowed them to then basically either put them together or just use the flare image or just use the other image. So they had this choice of like to superimpose the flare on top of the other image or whatever. But like that flaring, whatever thing you're getting, that distortion is done by just some dude holding some thing in front of the camera. It's not done in post at all, which I thought it was so cool. And if you watch the featurettes on the DVD, you'll see the guy operating the camera doing this, and it's really weird. It's a really strange, like elaborate setup because they've got these two cameras, and it's very complicated looking. And Danny Boyle talks about it very lovingly, like he's very proud of that effect. And to his credit, I've never seen anything like it.
Mm-mm.
I really haven't. To the extent that like I'm like, why haven't I seen this? It's really cool looking. Somebody else should have stolen this idea, and I don't know why nobody did, but it looks great. And it just adds this surreality to the Pinbacker character where nobody can quite see him. And and that's the other thing about it being organic, is that the sort of flaring is moving when the camera is not moving, which is not something that would generally happen with a flare unless there was some light source in the field of vision that was moving. But like nothing in the frame is moving, the camera's not moving, and yet the sort of distortion is moving, and that's because the guy's moving it. And that's what I think is so specific and so weird about it, is that there's this third dimensional element that's like moving independently of either the camera or the actor. And it's so like disorienting because you normally just don't have that kind of thing happen.
And it's not just a cool effect for visual coolness sake too. It works thematically, right? It's like you can't look at him directly. Yeah. They can't just see him, and perhaps, just like he's like sort of absorbed properties of the sun. Or to Vishal's point, like maybe he's not even real.
Right.
He's like, which that's cool that works both ways.
No, that was that effect, that scene. It was probably like maybe the high point, right? Like I'm not sure Gaby and my sister would have liked the movie as much. Like once it got to that effect, they're like, wait, what's going? Like all of a sudden there's like this new energy in the room, right? When we were like watching it together, it was like this like whole energy, because like up until that point it would just been like this sort of like cranking of tension, right? It was just a very tense, like, oh my god, like one thing after another is going wrong in the mission, and then like that effect happens and people are like, wait, what's going on? What's going on, right? the whole movie like turns like that third act just turns into something else, right? It becomes this like kind of great mini horror movie inside of it, as you said, right?
Vishal, thank you for being here. Sunshine. We got to the core of the sun. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough fuel to get back, so we're just gonna have to detonate the bomb and hang out here.
Goodbye, cruel world.
Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks a lot, guys. This is fun.
Thank you to the listeners. We are at Cowspod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspod.wordpress.com. The next episode is as yet to be determined, so I cannot announce it. We don't know what it will be, but it will be amazing. It'll be fun. We have loosely planned some fun stuff, but I can't announce it because we haven't actually scheduled it. We don't know. It's too loose, but it should be fun. Some fun guests. So look forward to that, and we'll see you next time.